The conference room aboard the TSS Endeavour was silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Ambassador Chen Warwick stood at the large window, staring at the alien station that floated in the darkness of space. It was massive, 10 times larger than any human structure, covered in strange symbols that glowed with a purple light. This was it, first contact with an advanced alien civilization. Everything humanity had worked for over the past 200 years had led to this moment. Behind him, his team waited nervously. There were 12 of them, experts in language, culture, science, and trade. They had spent 3 years traveling to this meeting point at the edge of human space. 3 years preparing speeches and gifts. 3 years hoping that humanity would finally find friends among the stars. Chen turned from the window and looked at his team. They were all young, full of hope. He remembered being like that once, before the bureaucracy and politics had worn him down. But today he felt that hope again. Today was important. Remember, he said quietly, we represent all of humanity. Every word matters. We came here to build bridges, not walls. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the team's lead scientist, nodded. The data we're prepared to share could save them decades of research. They'll see we come in good faith. The communication panel beeped. A message appeared in perfect English, translated by the alien AI systems. The Concordat will receive you now. Chen straightened his suit and led his team to the docking port. The airlock opened with a hiss and they stepped into another world. The Jathir station was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Everything was too big, built for creatures larger than humans. The walls pulsed with that same purple light and the air smelled like metal and something sweet that Chen couldn't identify. His heart pounded as they walked down the long corridor. At the end waited the Jathir. They were tall, nearly 3 meters high, with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished stone. Their faces were hard to read, with too many eyes and mouths that didn't quite move like human mouths. The lead Jathir wore robes covered in medals and symbols of rank. I am High Commander Zarketh, the alien said. The words came from a translator device, flat and emotionless. You are the humans. You are very small. Chen bowed respectfully, the way his cultural advisors had suggested. We are honored to meet you, High Commander. Humanity has dreamed of this day for generations. We come seeking friendship and mutual understanding. Zarketh's many eyes blinked in a pattern Chen couldn't interpret. Friendship is a concept for equals. You have 47 worlds. The Concordat has 2,000. You have traveled the stars for 200 of your years. We have done so for 50,000. Tell me, human, how are we equals? The words stung, but Chen maintained his smile. Every civilization starts somewhere, High Commander. We may be young, but we have much to offer. Our scientists have made breakthroughs in— We know what you have, Zarketh interrupted. We have been watching you since you left your home system. Your technology is primitive. Your ships are slow. Your weapons are crude. The alien leaned forward. But you have something we find curious. You have passion. You feel things strongly. Perhaps this makes you useful. Chen felt his team shift uncomfortably behind him. This wasn't going the way they had hoped. We would be happy to establish trade and cultural exchange. We've brought samples of our art, our music, our literature. We do not need your art, Zarketh said. But we will tell you what we do need. You have built colonies in space that belongs to the Concordat. I don't understand, Chen said carefully. Our survey showed those systems were uninhabited. We've been there for decades. Some colonies have been established for over 100 years. They were uninhabited because we had not yet chosen to inhabit them, Zarketh explained, as if speaking to a child. The Concordat claims all space within 500 light-years of our borders. You have built in our space without permission. This is unacceptable, Chen's heart sank. We didn't know. There were no markers, no claims filed with any known authority. If we had known, ignorance is not an excuse. You will evacuate 23 of your colonies. You have 1 of your years to complete this task. The room seemed to spin. Chen heard Dr. Martinez gasp behind him. 23 colonies. That was nearly half of all human settlements outside the core systems. Millions of people. Families who had built lives across generations. High Commander, please, Chen said, trying to keep his voice steady. These are homes. Children have been born on these worlds. Families have farms, businesses, entire communities. Can we not negotiate? Perhaps we could pay a lease or establish some kind of shared territory? Zarketh stood to his full height. You do not negotiate with the Concordat. You obey or you are removed. We are being generous by giving you time. Some on the concorded council suggested we simply destroy your colonies and be done with it. I convinced them to show mercy to your young species. Mercy, Chen repeated quietly. The word tasted bitter. You should thank me, Zarketh said. Now go, begin your evacuations. We will inspect your progress in 6 months. If you are not moving fast enough, we will help you move faster. The meeting was over. Chen and his team were escorted back to their ship in silence. No one spoke until the airlock sealed behind them, and they were back in human territory. That was a disaster, Martinez said, slumping into a chair. They treated us like insects. They treated us like we don't matter, another team member added. Did you hear how he talked about our technology? Our culture? Like we're nothing. Chen sat down heavily. His entire body felt tired. We need to report to the council. They need to know what we're facing. The trip back to Earth took 6 weeks. Chen spent every day writing his report, trying to find the right words to explain what had happened. How did you tell humanity that their first contact with an advanced civilization had resulted in demands and threats? How did you explain that peace might cost them millions of homes? The Terran Council met in Geneva, in the same building where the United Earth government had been formed 200 years earlier. 50 representatives from every major colony and Earth region sat in a circular chamber, and above them, watching via hologram, were another 200 observers from smaller settlements. Chen presented his report. He showed them recordings of the meeting, translations of the Jathir demands and maps of the colonies they wanted humanity to abandon. The debate that followed was fierce. Some council members wanted to refuse, to stand their ground and fight if necessary. Others argued that humanity couldn't afford a war with a civilization so much more advanced. The military advisors presented their analysis. The Jathir had weapons that could destroy entire planets, ships that could cross distances in days that took human vessels months, and an army that numbered in the billions. Admiral Sarah Kovac, the head of Terran Defense Forces, stood before the council. She was a tall woman with gray hair and hard eyes. She had fought in the colony disputes of 2320, back when human settlements had gone to war with each other over resources. She knew war, and she knew what it cost. Council members, she said, her voice echoing in the chamber. I understand the desire for peace. I've seen enough war to last several lifetimes. But I'm telling you now, if we give in to these demands, we're teaching the Jathir that they can take whatever they want from us. Today it's 23 colonies. Next year it will be 50. Then they'll demand Earth itself. What do you suggest? Asked Council Leader Harrison. Should we fight a war we cannot win? I suggest we show strength, Kovac said. Not aggression, but strength. We reinforce our borders. We modernize our fleet. We show them that pushing us has a cost, even if they would ultimately win. And how many people die while we show them this strength? Another council member asked. How many colonies get destroyed in the fighting? The debate continued for 3 days. In the end, the vote was close but clear. The council decided to evacuate 10 of the 23 colonies immediately, as a gesture of good faith. They would request negotiations for the remaining 13, offering compensation and long-term peaceful coexistence. Admiral Kovac voted against the measure. After the vote, she requested a private meeting with the council leadership. You're making a mistake, she told them. You're showing them we'll surrender anything to avoid war. We're showing them we're reasonable, Council Leader Harrison replied, that we're not a threat. They already know we're not a threat, Kovac said bitterly. That's why they're doing this. The evacuations began the next month. Chen watched as 10 colonies prepared to abandon their homes. The colony of New Providence had been settled for 90 years. It had schools, hospitals, parks where children played. Now those children watched as their parents packed everything they owned onto transport ships. On New Providence, Chen met a woman named Ellen Torres. She was 70 years old and had lived on the colony her entire life. Her grandparents had been among the first settlers. My grandmother planted the trees in Central Park, Ellen told him, pointing to a grove of earth oaks that had somehow survived on this alien world. She died under that big one there, the one with the twisted trunk. We scattered her ashes at its roots. And now I'm supposed to just leave her behind? Chen had no answer for her. He helped her onto the transport ship and watched as she cried, staring out the window at the world she would never see again. The evacuations took 4 months. 10 colonies, 4 million people, all relocated to overcrowded settlements in the inner systems. The process was painful but peaceful. Not a single shot was fired. Chen delivered his report on the successful evacuations to the Jathir. He included carefully worded requests for negotiations on the remaining 13 colonies. The Jathir response came 2 weeks later. "Your compliance is noted," Zarketh's message said. "You have proven you understand your place. However, upon review, we have determined that 13 additional colonies also fall within concordate space. You will evacuate these as well. You have 6 months." The message ended there. No negotiation, no discussion, just new demands. Chen sat in his office and stared at the message for a long time. Around him, Earth continued its daily routine. Billions of people unaware that their worlds were being taken from them piece by piece. He thought about Ellen Torres and her grandmother's tree. He thought about the children leaving their schools. He thought about the farms and the homes and the lives that had been built across decades of hard work. And he thought about Admiral Kovac's words, "You're teaching them we'll surrender anything." Chen opened a communication channel to the council. "We need to meet," he said. "The Jathir have made new demands." As he waited for the council to assemble, Chen looked out his window at Earth below. The blue and green planet that had given birth to humanity, that had sent its children to the stars in search of wonders and friends. They had found the stars. They had found wonders. But friends? That remained to be seen. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, Jathir ships moved toward the borders of human space, confident in their power, secure in their superiority. They did not know what they were starting. They did not know that humanity had a long memory. They did not know that peace was a choice humanity made, not a weakness humanity suffered from. But they would learn. In time they would learn. The alarms started at dawn on New Harmony, not the gentle chimes that usually woke the colony, but the harsh emergency klaxons that had never been used except in drills. 4,300,000 people woke to the news that changed everything. Governor Marcus Webb stood in the colony's command center, staring at the message that had arrived during the night. His hands shook as he read it for the 5th time, hoping the words would somehow change. All human presence must cease within 30 days. This is your final notice, 30 days. The Jathir were giving them 30 days to evacuate an entire world. "It's not possible," said Chief Engineer Patricia Holmes, looking at the evacuation calculations on her screen. "Even if we packed people into ships at maximum capacity, we'd need at least 45 days. That's if everything goes perfectly, no delays, no problems." "We don't have 45 days, Webb said. "We have 30. The evacuation began within hours. Every available ship in human space was redirected to New Harmony. Massive transport vessels, small private yachts, military carriers, even old freight haulers that hadn't flown in years. Anything that could carry people away from the colony. Chen arrived on New Harmony 3 days after the announcement. He had requested permission to speak directly with the Jathir commander overseeing the evacuation, a cold female named Shira, who commanded 3 warships orbiting the planet. Her face appeared on the communication screen, all sharp angles and too many eyes. "Ambassador Warwick, I wondered if you would come here to beg." Chen swallowed his anger. "Commander Shira, we are working as fast as we can, but the timeline is impossible. We need more time. 45 days instead of 30. Please, these are families, children, elderly people who cannot travel easily. Your inadequate infrastructure is not our concern," Shira replied. 30 days was generous. "We could have given you 30 hours, but why?" Chen asked, unable to stop himself. "What is gained by forcing this speed? These people are leaving. They're not fighting you. Just give them enough time to do it safely." Shira's expression didn't change. "You continue to misunderstand your position. You do not negotiate. You do not request, you obey. If your people are still on New Harmony when the deadline expires, that is your failure, not ours." The communication cut off. Chen stood in the command center, feeling helpless. Around him, the staff worked frantically to coordinate the evacuation. Families were assigned departure times. Priority was given to those with young children and elderly members. Everyone else would have to wait their turn. The waiting was the hardest part. Chen visited evacuation centers across the colony. He saw families camped in spaceports surrounded by whatever belongings they could carry. He saw children crying because they had to leave pets behind. He saw elderly people who had lived on New Harmony for 70 years, staring at the sky and wondering if they would die before they could leave. In a school that had been converted to a temporary shelter, Chen met a teacher named David Kim. He was helping his students pack their belongings, making sure each child had food and water for the journey. "Where will we go?" one little girl asked. She was maybe 7 years old with large brown eyes full of confusion. "Somewhere safe," David told her gently. "Somewhere new." "But I don't want somewhere new," the girl said. "I want home." David had no answer. Chen turned away, unable to watch. While humanity struggled to evacuate New Harmony, the galaxy watched with interest. Other alien species had been monitoring humanity since first contact. Most were curious about how this young species would handle their first real test. In the Kryn Assembly, a council of small species who had learned to survive in a galaxy dominated by powers like the Jathir, there was debate. "We should warn them," said Council Member Tresh, a four-armed being with soft blue skin. "The Concordat only understands strength. The humans are showing weakness, and the Concordat will exploit it until there is nothing left." "What can we do?" asked another council member. "If we help the humans, the Concordat will turn on us next. Then we help them secretly," Tresh suggested. "Information, at least. They deserve to know what they're facing." A Kryn ship approached Earth a week into the evacuation. The communication was brief and anonymous. "The Concordat is testing you. They will take and take until you show them the cost of taking. Your peace is admirable but will be your destruction. A friend who has learned this lesson the hard way." The message was delivered to Admiral Kovac, who took it to the council. Most dismissed it as alien politics, nothing humanity needed to be concerned with. But Kovac studied the message for hours, knowing in her bones that it spoke truth. On New Harmony, the evacuation continued around the clock. Ships arrived, filled with people, and left as quickly as they could. The spaceports never closed. The loading never stopped. 20 days in, they had evacuated 3 million people. 1,300,000 remained. 25 days in, 900,000 people still waited for transport. Chen requested another communication with Commander Shira. He waited 6 hours before she responded. "We are running out of time," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We need just 5 more days. We're so close. Please show mercy." Shira seemed amused. "Mercy, you use that word often." "Very well, human. I will show you Concordat mercy. You have 3 more days. Not 5, 3 days? That's not enough. We'll still have hundreds of thousands of people, then work faster," Shira said. "Or don't, the choice is yours." The communication ended. Earth sent every available ship. Military vessels designed for combat were hastily converted to carry civilians. Private companies donated their entire fleets. Pilots flew triple shifts, sleeping in their cockpits between runs. The human race poured everything it had into saving the people of New Harmony. It wasn't enough. Day 33 arrived. 600,000 people remained on the planet. They crowded into the remaining spaceports, watching the sky, praying for more ships. The Jathir warships moved into position above the colony's major settlements. Governor Webb sent a final desperate message. "Please, we're still evacuating. We just need more time." Commander Shira's response was simple. "Your time is finished." The bombardment began in the southern continent. The Jathir targeted the abandoned settlements, the towns and cities that had already been evacuated. Except they weren't completely abandoned. Evacuation teams were still there, loading the last stragglers, checking empty buildings, trying to save everyone. The first strike hit the town of Riverside. Population 60,000 supposedly evacuated, but 3,000 people were still there, mostly elderly residents who had refused to leave until the very end, and the evacuation crews helping them. The blast could be seen from orbit. A bright flash, then a mushroom cloud rising into the sky. 3,000 people gone in an instant. Chen was on a transport ship when the news came through. He watched the video feeds in horror as more strikes hit other abandoned areas. The Jathir were systematically destroying the empty settlements, never bothering to check if they were actually empty. "They're still killing people," Chen shouted into the communication channel. "Cease fire. We're still evacuating." Commander Shira's face appeared on screen. "You had your time. These deaths are your failure, not ours. You should have worked faster." The bombardment continued for 6 hours. 80,000 people died in the strikes, caught in buildings they were clearing, on roads they were traveling, in spaceports they were fleeing from. Earth demanded an immediate ceasefire. The Jathir ignored them. The evacuation became a desperate race against death. Ships dove into the atmosphere, landed just long enough to grab whoever was nearby and launched before the next strike hit. Pilots performed maneuvers that should have been impossible, saving lives through skill and courage and sheer stubborn determination. 12 civilian transport ships were destroyed by Jathir fire. The Concordat claimed they were too slow to leave the restricted zones. 5,000 more people died. The last ship left New Harmony on day 35. As it climbed into space, the crew watched the Jathir warships begin final bombardment of the remaining cities. Buildings that had stood for a century collapsed in seconds. Parks where children had played became craters. The colony that 4 million people had called home was erased from existence. Final death toll, 127,000 civilians. On Earth, the public reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests filled the streets of every major city. People demanded action, justice, war. The families of the dead wanted someone to be held accountable. The Terran Council held an emergency session. The chamber was filled with shouting, anger, and grief. We gave them what they wanted. One council member yelled, "We evacuated. We did everything they demanded, and they still murdered our people." "This is exactly what I warned you about," Admiral Kovac said coldly. "You cannot negotiate with bullies. They see your peace as weakness, your mercy as cowardice. And now 127,000 people are dead because we wouldn't show strength when it mattered." Council Leader Harrison looked older than his years. "What do you suggest, Admiral? War? Against an enemy that can do this to an entire planet? I suggest we stop pretending that peace at any cost is actually peace," Kovac said. "We're not at peace. We're being conquered slowly. The only question is whether we'll fight back before there's nothing left to fight for." The council voted again. Some wanted immediate military action. Others still believed in diplomacy. The majority voted to continue pursuing peace, but to file formal protests with the galactic community about the Jathir actions. The galactic community's response was silence. No one wanted to anger the Concordat. Admiral Kovac requested permission to address the council one final time. She stood before them, still in her uniform, medals from a dozen conflicts glinting on her chest. "I have served the Terran Defense Forces for 42 years, she said quietly. "I have fought pirates, terrorists, and in the colony disputes I fought other humans. I have seen war up close. I hate it. I hate everything about it, but I hate watching my people die begging for mercy even more." She removed her admiral's stars and placed them on the council leader's desk. "I resign effective immediately. I will not command forces that are forbidden from defending their own people. History will judge what we did here. I hope you can live with that judgment." She walked out of the chamber to absolute silence. The story might have ended there. The council might have continued its policy of peace at any cost. Humanity might have slowly surrendered world after world until nothing remained. But Kovac wasn't finished. She went directly to the galactic news networks, the communication channels that broadcast across 1,000 worlds. She had no authority anymore, no official position. She was just a woman who had spent her life in uniform, speaking truth. "My name is Sarah Kovac. I was an admiral in the Terran Defense Forces. I resigned today because I could not continue to serve a government that prioritizes politics over people's lives. I want the galaxy to know what happened at New Harmony." She showed the footage, all of it, the desperate evacuations, the families torn apart, the strikes that killed people who were still fleeing, the ships destroyed while trying to save lives. The final death toll. 127,000 human beings died at New Harmony. They died begging for mercy. They died following every rule, obeying every demand, doing everything asked of them. And they were murdered anyway because the Jathir Concordat wanted to teach us a lesson about our place in the galaxy. Her voice grew harder. Well, they taught us a lesson. They taught us that peace means nothing to them, that mercy is weakness, that our lives have no value in their eyes. The Jathir Concordat will learn something in return. Humanity has a long memory. We remember every name, every face, every life taken from us. And memory, in the end, is what drives justice. The broadcast went viral across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched a human woman show them the reality of Concordat expansion. Some felt sympathy. Others felt fear at the emotion in her voice. A few recognized it for what it was, a warning. The Jathir intercepted the broadcast and prepared their own response. Commander Shira appeared on galactic networks, her voice full of contempt. The human cries about consequences of their own failures. They could not evacuate efficiently. They could not follow simple instructions. Their people died because they are inferior, primitive, emotional. This is what happens when lesser species attempt to exist among their betters. Perhaps now they will learn their proper place, and she laughed. The sound was cold and cruel. Let them remember. Let them cry. It changes nothing. The Concordat is eternal. Humanity is barely a footnote in history. The broadcast ended. On Earth, Chen Warwick watched both broadcasts. He sat in his office, surrounded by reports from New Harmony, lists of the dead, messages from families asking if their loved ones had survived. He thought about the little girl in the school, the one who just wanted to go home. Her name had been on the casualty list. She had died in the Riverside strike. Chen made a decision then. He began composing a message, one that would not be sent through official channels, one that the council would not approve. But before he could finish, the Jathier made another demand. Earth itself would disarm its orbital defense network and submit to Concordat oversight. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do. The council prepared to debate. Admiral Kovac, no longer constrained by military protocol, began making calls to people she had served with, people who remembered what humanity had been before it chose peace. And somewhere in the deep vaults beneath Earth's military installations, automated systems began to wake up, triggered by threat assessments that had not been met in 200 years. The storm was coming. The galaxy just didn't know it yet. 6 months after New Harmony, humanity existed in a state of exhausted compliance. 18 more colonies had been evacuated. 31 million people had been relocated, crowding into inter-system worlds that were never designed to hold so many. Earth's population centers swelled beyond capacity. Mars added 3 million refugees. Europa's underwater cities took in another 2 million. Every human settlement made room somehow, but the strain showed everywhere. Ambassador Chen Warwick sat in his office on the diplomatic station orbiting Earth. His hair had gone gray in the past year. He slept maybe 3 hours a night when nightmares allowed it. Every morning he woke up and saw the faces of the people who had died at New Harmony. Every night he went to bed wondering if he could have saved them. But he kept working, because that's what you did. You kept trying to find a way through, a way to peace that didn't cost everything. The latest round of negotiations had been brutal. The Jathier wanted 5 more colonies. Chen had spent 3 weeks arguing for a buffer zone instead. Just 5 neutral systems between human and Concordat space where neither side would settle. It seemed reasonable. It cost the Concordat nothing. It gave humanity a small measure of security. The Jathier response had arrived that morning. Rejected. Evacuate the 5 colonies. You have standard timeline. Chen stared at the message and felt something break inside him. He had given everything to these negotiations. He had sacrificed his health, his peace of mind, his faith in the goodness of the universe, and it had achieved nothing except delaying the inevitable. His assistant, a young woman named Yuki Tanaka, brought him coffee and a briefing pad. The council wants your assessment of the situation, sir. My assessment? Chen laughed bitterly. We're being dismantled piece by piece. They'll keep demanding and demanding until we have nothing left to give. Then they'll demand Earth itself. Some council members think we should give them the orbital defense grid, Yuki said quietly. They think it might satisfy the Concordat, show them we're no threat. Chen looked at her in disbelief. Are they insane? Those satellites are the only thing protecting Earth. If we give them up, we're completely defenseless. They believe the Concordat would have no reason to attack us if we're no threat. The Concordat doesn't need reasons. Chen slammed his hand on the desk. They attacked New Harmony while people were evacuating. They killed civilians who were doing exactly what they demanded. These aren't reasonable beings looking for security. They're bullies who won't stop until someone makes them stop. He immediately felt guilty for the outburst. Yuki didn't deserve his anger. None of this was her fault, I'm sorry, he said. I'm tired, Yuki, I'm so tired of this. Before she could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency broadcasts lit up every screen. Jathier fleet detected entering Sol system. Multiple capital ships. This is not a drill. Chen's blood went cold. They're here. They're actually here. He ran to the command center. Every screen showed the same terrifying sight. 30 Jathier warships had appeared at the edge of the Sol system and were moving toward Earth. These weren't diplomatic vessels. These were warships, massive and bristling with weapons. The Terran Council convened an emergency session via hologram. Council leader Harrison looked sick. "They're demanding immediate compliance with their terms," Harrison said. "Earth's orbital defense network must be dismantled within 72 hours, or they will dismantle it for us." "This is madness," another council member said. "If we give them the satellites, what's to stop them from demanding we dismantle our ground defenses next? Or our fleet? What choice do we have?" Someone else asked. "We can't fight 30 capital ships. They'd destroy us." The debate raged while Chen watched the Jothir fleet creep closer to Earth. Each hour they advanced, testing humanity's response. The Terran defense fleet scrambled to intercept, but everyone knew it was useless. Humanity's entire fleet was no match for even half the Jothir force. Admiral Kovac appeared on the council channel, broadcasting from her private residence. She had no official authority anymore, but people still listened when she spoke. "They're not here to negotiate," she said. "This is a show of force. They want to see if we'll kneel completely. If we do, they'll own us. Every decision, every action, every aspect of human existence will be subject to their approval." "Is that really peace? Or is that just slavery?" "It's survival," Council Leader Harrison said tiredly. "Sometimes survival requires compromise." "At what point does compromise become surrender?" Kovac asked. "At what point do we decide some things are worth fighting for, even if the fight is hopeless?" The council voted. 27 for compliance, 23 against. Earth would dismantle its orbital defense network. Chen listened to the vote results and felt numb. They had lost. Not in battle, but in will. Humanity had chosen to surrender rather than resist. But the Jothir weren't satisfied with just a vote. While the council debated implementation timelines, while human engineers prepared to shut down the defense satellites, the Jothir made a decision. They would not wait for compliance. They would demonstrate what happened when humanity took too long to obey. The target was Harvest, an agricultural colony world in the Tau Ceti system. Population, 8,200,000. It was one of the oldest human colonies settled 200 years ago, covered in vast farms that produced food for a dozen worlds. It was far from the disputed territories. It had never been on any evacuation list. It should have been safe. The Jothir claimed that Harvest was being fortified in violation of good faith negotiations. This was a lie. Harvest had no military presence beyond a small local police force. But the Concordat needed to send a message. The attack came without warning. 6 Jothir warships entered the Tau Ceti system and immediately began orbital bombardment of Harvest. They didn't target military sites because there were none. They didn't demand evacuation because they didn't want evacuation. They wanted death. The strikes were methodical and thorough. Every major city, every town, every farming settlement. The warships carved lines of destruction across the entire planet, systematically erasing every trace of human habitation. The colonists had no chance to flee, no time to hide, no hope of mercy. The bombardment lasted 6 hours. When it was finished, Harvest was a dead world. 8,200,000 people had been alive that morning. By evening, there was no one left. Not a single survivor. The news reached Earth in stages. First confused reports of an attack, then horrific confirmation as ships arrived to find nothing but ruins. Finally, the devastating truth. An entire world had been murdered. Chen was in his office when the final casualty report came through. 8,200,000. The number didn't seem real. It was too big, too horrible to comprehend. How did you mourn 8 million people? How did you even begin? His hands shook as he read the Jothir justification, broadcast to the entire galaxy. Humanity's resistance and delays in compliance required correction. The colony world designated Harvest has been sterilized as an example. Further resistance will result in additional corrective measures. The Concordat has spoken. Something inside Chen broke completely then. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once. Like a dam that had been holding back a flood suddenly giving way. All his life he had believed in diplomacy, in finding common ground, in the power of words to solve conflicts. He had given everything to that belief. And it had led to this. 8 million people dead because he had convinced humanity to keep talking, keep negotiating, keep hoping for peace. He thought about Ellen Torres and her grandmother's tree, about the little girl who just wanted to go home. about every person who had trusted him to find a way through this without war. They were all dead now. All of them. Chen opened a recording device. His hands were steady now, steadied by a terrible certainty. He knew what needed to be done, what should have been done months ago. "This is Ambassador Chen Warwick," he said into the camera. "This message is for the Jathir Concordat, for the Supreme Hierarch, for every member of the Concordat who participated in the destruction of Harvest. And it is for the galaxy, so they know what happened here and why what comes next is justified." He pulled up images of Harvest, the beautiful farms, the cities full of art and music, the schools where children learned, all of it before the attack. Then he showed the after images, the ruins, the ash, the emptiness. For 5 years, humanity has pursued peace with the Jathir Concordat. We evacuated colonies at your demand. We relocated millions of our people. We gave up our homes, our territory, our dignity. We did this because we believed peace was worth any cost. We were wrong. His voice grew harder. You killed 127,000 people at New Harmony while they were evacuating. You called it our failure. Today you killed 8,200,000 people who were simply living their lives, farming, raising their children, bothering no one. You called it correction. You called it an example. Chen leaned forward, staring directly into the camera. "We heard you. We understand the example you meant to teach. You wanted to show us that resistance is futile, that we exist only at your mercy, that human life has no value in the eyes of the Concordat." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But you have taught us a different lesson. You have taught us that there is no peace with bullies, that mercy is wasted on those who see it as weakness, that some things are worth fighting for even when the fight seems hopeless." Behind Chen, unnoticed by him, an encrypted message was being transmitted across human space, a message with authority codes that had not been used in 200 years, a message that reached deep military installations on Earth, Mars, Europa, and a dozen other worlds. A message that said simply, "Protocol Omega, Authorization Warwick, Execute." The Terran Council convened again, but this time the atmosphere was different. The chamber was silent. No one argued for peace. No one suggested negotiations. They all just stared at the images from Harvest. Council Leader Harrison spoke, his voice hollow. "We have been trying to save humanity through surrender. Instead, we have shown the galaxy that human life is cheap, that we can be killed with impunity, that we will accept any atrocity rather than fight back. This cannot continue." The vote was unanimous. The Terran Federation was dissolved, its authority transferred to an emergency war directorate. The time for councils and debates was over. The first act of the War Directorate was to recall Admiral Sarah Kovac from retirement. She was given complete authority over all human military forces and a simple directive: protect humanity, by any means necessary. Kovac stood in her old office looking at the stars through the window. She had known this day would come, had tried to prevent it by warning the council months ago, but they hadn't listened until it was too late. Now 8 million people were dead, and her job was to make sure their deaths meant something. "Unseal the vaults," she ordered. "Activate Protocol Omega. It's time to show the galaxy what humanity is really capable of." Across human space, ancient military facilities came alive. Underground complexes that had been sealed for 200 years opened their doors. Shipyards that had been building civilian vessels switched to military production. Research stations that had been developing peaceful technologies pulled out old weapons blueprints and updated them. Humanity had chosen peace after the unification wars because war had nearly destroyed them. They had been good at it, terrifyingly good, and it had scared them. So they had locked away their weapons and their warships and their terrible knowledge of how to kill efficiently, but they had kept it all, just in case. The just in case had arrived. Chen finished his recording. He had one more thing to say. One final message before everything changed. "This is the final transmission from the Terran Federation," he said softly. "We tried peace. We offered friendship. We showed mercy even when none was shown to us. For 5 years, we did everything in our power to avoid war. You have made war inevitable." His eyes were full of tears, but his voice was steady. "For 8 million people who died on Harvest. For 127,000 who died at New Harmony. For every human who has suffered at Concordat hands, we are coming for you. We will not negotiate. We will not surrender. We will not stop." He paused one final time. "We tried peace. Now you will know human vengeance. The message went out across every channel, every frequency, every communication network that reached the stars. Within hours, the entire galaxy heard it. The Jothir received it with contempt. The Supreme Hierarch issued a mocking response. The humans threaten us? With what, their inferior ships? Their primitive weapons? Let them come. We will sweep them aside as we have swept aside 100 species before them. The Concordat is eternal. Humanity is nothing. But some species, the older ones who had seen empires rise and fall, who understood that danger often came from unexpected places, heard something else in Chen's message. They heard a promise being made, and they remembered their own histories, their own stories of predators who had been pushed too far. In the Kryn assembly, Council member Tresh listened to the transmission and felt a chill run down its spine. They have released something terrible, it said to the other council members. The Concordat thinks they are crushing a weak species. They do not realize they have awakened something that was sleeping, something that chose peace not because it had to, but because it wanted to. What do you mean? Another member asked. I have studied human history, Tresh said quietly. They have been very good at peace for 200 years. But before that? Before that, they were very, very good at war. And you know what I have learned about beings who are good at war? They never really forget. They just remember how terrible they are and choose not to be, until someone forces them to remember. Tresh looked at the images from Harvest, at the ruins of a world that had been alive and full of hope just hours ago. The Jothir have forced them to remember. May whatever gods exist have mercy on them, because humanity will have none. On Earth, Admiral Kovac stood before her assembled officers. Some were old veterans like her, recalled from retirement. Others were young, fresh from the academy, eager to prove themselves. All of them wore the same expression, grim determination. The Jothir think they know us, she said. They think we're weak, emotional, primitive. They're right about one thing: we are emotional. We love deeply, we grieve deeply, and we remember deeply every name from Harvest, every face from New Harmony, every home we've been forced to abandon. We remember it all. She looked at each of them. They wanted to teach us a lesson about our place in the galaxy. We're going to teach them a lesson in return. They're going to learn that there's a difference between a species that can't fight and a species that chooses not to. They're going to learn what humanity is really capable of when we stop holding back, and they're going to learn it too late. The officers saluted. The war had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The galaxy received Earth's final transmission with reactions that ranged from pity to amusement. Most alien species assumed humanity's declaration of war was a desperate, emotional outburst that would end in quick defeat. The Jothir Concordat didn't even bother to mobilize their full military. Why waste resources on insects? Supreme Hierarch Kalamoth watched the human transmission from his throne chamber on Jothir Prime. The building was a monument to Concordat power, carved from a single massive crystal that had taken 10,000 slaves a century to complete. He had ruled for 300 years and had seen countless species make similar threats. They all ended the same way, submission or extinction. The humans are preparing for war, his military advisor reported. Our intelligence shows increased activity at their shipyards and military installations. Kalmuth laughed, a sound like grinding stones. Let them prepare. Send 3 fleets to human space. That should be more than sufficient to crush whatever resistance they attempt. Make examples of their core worlds. I want the rest of the galaxy to see what happens to species who forget their place. What the Concordat didn't know, what no one in the galaxy knew, was that humanity's 200 years of peace had been a choice, not a necessity. In the deep vaults beneath Earth's military command center, Admiral Kovac stood before a massive sealed door. It hadn't been opened since the Unification Wars ended in 2142. The biometric scanner read her handprint, her retinal pattern, her DNA. A voice from the intercom requested verbal confirmation. Admiral Sarah Kovac, she said clearly. Authorization code Omega Black 7. Unseal Project Warfather. The door opened with a sound like thunder. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of metal and oil and something else, something that made the hair on Kovac's neck stand up. She walked into the darkness and lights flickered on automatically, revealing a sight that took her breath away. Ships. Hundreds of ships, but not like the civilian vessels that made up most of humanity's current fleet. These were warships from humanity's darker days, when Earth's nations had fought each other for survival. Dreadnoughts designed for one purpose: maximum destruction. Each one was equipped with weapons that had been banned by international treaty after the wars ended. Kinetic bombardment systems that could crack continents, directed energy weapons that could vaporize cities, missiles with nuclear, chemical, and biological payloads. Jesus Christ, whispered Colonel Marcus Brand, who had accompanied Kovac. I knew we'd kept some weapons, but this is what we were, Kovac said quietly. This is what we decided we never wanted to be again. But the choice was always ours to make. The Jathir took that choice away. She walked among the ships, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. Each vessel had a name and a history. The Vengeance, which had broken the back of the Pacific Alliance in 2138. The Relentless, which had held the line at the Battle of Mars. The Fury, the Wrath, the Havoc, ships named for destruction because that's what they delivered. Wake them up, Kovac ordered. All of them. And activate Project Ragnarok. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Similar scenes played out across human space. On Mars, engineers entered sealed facilities beneath Olympus Mons and found weapons that made the dreadnoughts look gentle. Planet-killer missiles, each capable of destroying a world's biosphere. They had been built during the darkest days of the Unification Wars, when each side had prepared to destroy Earth rather than lose it. They had never been used, thank God, but they existed. And now they would be useful. On Europa, beneath the ice, automated factories came online. These had once produced the war drones that fought in the vacuum of space, machines that didn't need air or food or rest. They could kill efficiently and endlessly, controlled by AI systems that calculated optimal destruction. The factories had been idle for 2 centuries. Within days, they would be producing thousands of drones every hour. Project Ghost Fleet activated across a dozen systems. Millions of autonomous combat drones, each no bigger than a human but deadly beyond measure. They had been humanity's answer to superior numbers during the Unification Wars. One person could control 10,000 drones. One ship could coordinate millions. During the wars, Ghost Fleet operations had turned battles that should have been massacres into victories. Now they would be used against an external enemy, but the most important thing that woke up was the soldiers themselves. In cryogenic facilities across human space, veterans from the Unification Wars began to thaw. Men and women who had been frozen at the war's end, too dangerous to let loose in peacetime, too valuable to destroy. The best soldiers humanity had ever produced. The ones who had survived years of constant combat and gotten better at killing with each battle. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos woke up in a medical bay on Earth. The last thing she remembered was agreeing to cryogenic sleep in 2143. The doctor who explained that it was now 2347 seemed impossibly young. 200 years? She asked, her voice rough from disuse. Why wake me now? Because we're at war, the doctor said. And Admiral Kovac says we need soldiers who know how to win against superior forces. Maria smiled grimly. Then you woke the right people. Give me a rifle and point me at the enemy. Across human space, 30,000 soldiers like Maria Santos woke up and prepared for war. They were given new weapons, briefed on 2 centuries of technological advancement, and shown what had happened to Harvest and New Harmony. That last part was important. These were people who understood war, who had lived through years of it. They didn't need their anger managed or their emotions controlled. They just needed to know who the enemy was and why they deserved what was coming. The briefing on the Jathir took 1 hour. When it was finished, not a single soldier asked for mercy or restraint. They just asked when they could start. While humanity armed itself, the Jathir prepared their attack with casual confidence. 3 fleets, 200 ships each moved toward human space. It was overwhelming force against what the Concordat considered a primitive enemy. Their crews joked about how quickly the war would be over. Admiral Kovac let them come. She needed time to finish preparations, and every day the Jathir spent traveling was another day for human shipyards to work miracles. The civilian infrastructure that had built colonies across the stars now turned to military production. Weapons, ships, drones, all of it pouring out of factories that hadn't made instruments of war in 200 years. But humanity didn't just rely on old weapons. They updated them. The dreadnoughts from the vaults were refitted with modern power systems, advanced targeting AI, and shields that incorporated technology humanity had developed peacefully over 2 centuries. Each ship became something that hadn't existed before. The brutal efficiency of Unification War's design, combined with the advanced technology of a spacefaring civilization. The result was terrifying. When the first Jathir fleet entered human space, they expected easy victory. What they found was a nightmare. The attack came at the border system of Arcturus. The Jathir fleet of 200 warships emerged from their faster-than-light travel, expecting to face maybe 30 human vessels. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by 500 ships, and before they could react, the Ghost Fleet arrived. 10 million combat drones swarmed the Jathir fleet like locusts. Each drone was small, hard to hit, and equipped with weapons designed to find and exploit weaknesses. They attacked in coordinated waves, never giving the Jathir time to establish defensive formations. When the capital ships tried to use their heavy weapons, the drones scattered, then reformed and attacked from different angles. Within the chaos of the drone attack, human dreadnoughts struck. These weren't like the careful defensive battles the Jathir expected. These were brutal assaults designed to cripple and kill as quickly as possible. Kinetic weapons moving at relativistic speeds punched through concordant shields and hulls. Directed energy weapons cut ships in half. Missiles that the Jathir point defenses couldn't stop because there were too many, all coming too fast. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it was over, 173 Jathir ships were destroyed. 27 managed to escape. They carried stories of impossible human weapons and coordinated attacks that seemed to predict every concordant move. The survivors returned to concordant space in shock. This wasn't supposed to happen. The humans were primitive, weak. How had they fielded such a force? Supreme Hierarch Kalmuth watched the battle reports with growing anger. This is impossible. They had nothing 6 months ago. Where did these weapons come from? We don't know, Hierarch, his advisor said nervously. Our intelligence showed no indication of this level of military capability. Because they hid it, Kovac said, though she was light years away, saying it to her own officers. We let them think we were weak. We let them think they knew everything about us. Now they're learning what we really are. The second and third Jathir fleets converged on human space together, 400 ships strong. Surely this would be enough to overwhelm the humans. They entered the Centauri system expecting another battle. What they got was an ambush. Admiral Kovac had spent a week preparing the Centauri trap. Every asteroid in the system had been seeded with weapons platforms. The gas giant's moons held hidden shipyards that launched fresh drones every hour, and waiting in the outer system, hidden by advanced stealth technology humanity had developed, were 20 of the new model dreadnoughts. The Jathir fleet entered Centauri and immediately came under fire from every direction. Weapons platforms that looked like rocks or ice fragments suddenly activated and struck. Drones emerged from hiding spots throughout the system, and the dreadnoughts appeared behind the concordant formation, cutting off their escape. The Jathir fought desperately. They were skilled warriors with advanced weapons. But they were fighting an enemy that had spent 200 years learning how to kill efficiently, and then had forced themselves to stop. Now that they had started again, all that knowledge and skill came flooding back. Sergeant Santos led a boarding action on a Jathir command ship. Her squad moved through the corridors like death incarnate. The Jathir had never faced human soldiers in close combat before. They learned quickly that humanity's physical weakness compared to their size and strength didn't matter when humans fought with coordinated precision and weapons designed to kill larger beings. For harvest, Santos said as she planted charges on the ship's reactor. The command ship exploded 3 minutes later. The Battle of Centauri lasted 2 days. When it ended, 347 Jathir ships were destroyed. 53 escaped, but they were damaged and demoralized. The galaxy watched in shock. How were the humans doing this? The Concordate was supposed to be invincible. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, defeated dozens of species. How were they losing to humans? The answer was simple. The Jathir had been fighting species that were peaceful because they couldn't be anything else. Humanity was peaceful because they chose to be, and now they had chosen something different. After Centauri, Admiral Kovac didn't wait for the Jathir to regroup. She took the war to them. Human fleets struck concordant military bases across their empire. Not the homeworlds, not yet, but every shipyard, every weapons depot, every military training facility. The attacks were simultaneous and coordinated. The Ghost Fleet could be in 1,000 places at once, and human dreadnoughts could strike and retreat before concordant reinforcements arrived. The Jathir military, which had seemed so powerful, began to crumble. They were fighting an enemy they didn't understand using tactics they couldn't predict. Every time they thought they had figured out human strategy, the strategy changed. On Jathir Prime, Supreme Hierarch Kalmoth finally understood what he was facing. This wasn't a primitive species lashing out. This was a military machine that had been sleeping, and he had woken it up. "Send a communication to the humans," he ordered. "Offer negotiations. We can end this." The message reached Admiral Kovac 3 days later. She read it in her command center, surrounded by tactical displays showing Concordat bases burning. "They want to negotiate," her communications officer reported. Kovac remembered New Harmony. She remembered Harvest. She remembered every human who had died begging for mercy that never came. "Reply," she said coldly. "We tried negotiation. You taught us it was weakness. Now we'll teach you why humanity chose peace." She turned to her fleet commanders. "Continue the attacks. Hit them everywhere at once. I want their military infrastructure crippled within the week. Then we move on their core worlds." Around the galaxy, other species watched and learned. The Kryn Collective began sending covert supplies to humanity, food and medical equipment to help care for the relocated refugees. They didn't send weapons because humanity clearly didn't need them. Some species began withdrawing their ambassadors from Concordat space. The Invincible Empire suddenly didn't seem so invincible. The Jathir Hierarch sent another message, more desperate this time. "Please, we can discuss terms. We can return your territories. We can pay reparations." Kovac showed the message to Ambassador Chen Warwick, who had joined the War Directorate as its diplomatic advisor. "What do you think?" she asked. Chen looked at the message for a long time. He thought about every negotiation he had attempted, every plea he had made. Every time the Jathir had laughed and made new demands. "I think they should have thought about terms before they murdered 8 million people," he said quietly. "Reject their offer. Tell them we'll discuss terms when they surrender unconditionally, not before." The human fleet continued its advance toward Jathir Prime. The Concordat's home fleet, the most powerful military force they had, prepared for the final battle. But they had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. Because humanity wasn't just good at war, they were good at total war. They had learned during the Unification Wars that if you were going to fight, you fought to win completely. You didn't leave your enemy capable of coming back. You didn't show mercy that could be mistaken for weakness. You finished it. And humanity was going to finish it. The siege of Jathir Prime began on a quiet morning. The sun rose over the crystal towers of the Concordat capital, just as it had for 10,000 years. Citizens went about their daily routines, confident in the power of their empire. They had been told the war with humanity was a minor irritation, a small species having a tantrum before being put back in its place. Then the human fleet arrived. 500 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Behind them came the Ghost Fleet, millions of drones forming a cloud that blocked out the stars. And behind that came the supply ships, the medical frigates, the troop carriers. This wasn't a raid. This was an invasion. On the planet below, alarms finally began to sound. Supreme Hierarch Kalmoth stood in his war room, surrounded by his military commanders, and for the first time in his 300 years of life he felt fear. "How many ships?" he asked. 500 capital ships, his military advisor replied, voice shaking. "Approximately 7 million combat drones. Unknown number of support vessels. They've established a blockade. Nothing can get in or out. What about our home fleet?" They're moving to engage. 1,200 ships strong. We still have numerical superiority." Kalmoth nodded, trying to convince himself that numbers still mattered. "Then we can still win." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. The Battle of Jathir Prime was not quick. The Concordat home fleet was the pride of their military, crewed by their best warriors, equipped with their most advanced weapons. They fought with the desperation of beings defending their home. They fought bravely and died honorably. It didn't matter. Admiral Kovac had not brought her fleet here to exchange honor and glory. She had come to end this war permanently. Her tactics were brutal and efficient. The Ghost Fleet swarmed the Concordat ships, overwhelming their point defenses and shields. When gaps appeared in their formation, human dreadnoughts struck with overwhelming firepower. There was no elegance to it, no glory, just methodical destruction. The battle lasted 3 days. When it was over, the Concordat home fleet was gone. 1,187 ships destroyed, 13 escaped into deeper space, 2 damaged to ever fight again. Jathir Prime was defenseless. Kovac established orbit over the planet and sent a message to the surface. You have 24 hours to surrender unconditionally. If you do not, we will begin dismantling your military infrastructure. We will not target civilian populations, but we will remove your ability to ever threaten anyone again. You have 24 hours. On the surface, the Concordat leadership argued. Some wanted to fight on, to make the humans pay for every inch of ground. Others recognized that continued resistance would only lead to more death. The humans had shown they were willing and able to destroy anything they targeted. Supreme Hierarch Kalmoth made the decision. He had started this war with his arrogance and cruelty. He would end it to save his people. We surrender, he said, his voice broadcast across all channels. The Concordat surrenders to humanity. Please, no more death. We surrender. The message reached Admiral Kovac's flagship. She read it without expression. Around her, the command crew waited to see how she would respond. They had been fighting for 3 months straight. Every one of them had friends who died at New Harmony or family who perished on Harvest. Every one of them wanted revenge. But Kovac remembered something her old commander had told her during the Unification Wars. A good soldier knows when to fight. A great soldier knows when to stop. Accept their surrender, she ordered. But make it clear, this is unconditional. They don't get to negotiate terms. They get to accept ours, or we continue dismantling their military until there's nothing left. The surrender terms were delivered to Jathir Prime the next day. Ambassador Chen Warwick had written them, with input from the War Directorate and representatives from every human colony that had been affected by Concordat aggression. The terms were harsh but not cruel. Complete and permanent disbandment of all Concordat military forces. They could maintain local police for security, but no warships, no weapons of mass destruction, no military infrastructure. War crimes trials for Supreme Hierarch Kalmoth and all commanders who participated in the attacks on New Harmony and Harvest. They would be judged by a galactic tribunal, not just human judges. Reparations paid over 100 years to rebuild what the Concordat had destroyed. Not just money, but labor, resources, technology. The Concordat would help rebuild every colony they had forced humanity to abandon. Human observers stationed on every major Concordat world for the next century to ensure compliance and prevent remilitarization. And perhaps most importantly, education. Every Jathir child would be taught what their government had done. The deaths at New Harmony and Harvest would become part of their history curriculum. They would learn why it happened and what it cost. They would learn that actions have consequences and that might does not make right. The Concordat accepted the terms. They had no choice. The war crimes trial took place on a neutral space station, broadcast across the galaxy so all species could watch. Supreme Hierarch Kalmoth stood before judges from a dozen different civilizations, including 3 humans. The evidence was overwhelming. Communications showing the deliberate targeting of civilian populations. Orders to continue bombardment during evacuation. Recordings of Concordat commanders laughing about human deaths. Images from New Harmony and Harvest before and after. Kalmoth tried to justify his actions. We were establishing order. The humans needed to understand their place in the galactic hierarchy. We have done this with dozens of species. It is how the strong guide the weak toward civilization. Ambassador Warwick spoke for humanity during the trial. His hair was completely white now, his face lined with exhaustion and grief. But his voice was strong. You didn't guide us toward civilization, he said quietly. You murdered 8 million people to teach us fear. You killed 127,000 more because we weren't fast enough in our obedience. You called it order. You called it guidance. History will call it what it really was, genocide. He stepped closer to the defendant. You wanted to teach us our place in the galaxy. You succeeded. We learned that our place is among those who will never let this happen again. Not to us and not to anyone else. You taught us that peace is precious, but that some things are worth fighting for. You taught us that the strong do not guide the weak toward civilization. The strong protect the weak from predators like you. The judges deliberated for 3 days. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all charges. Life imprisonment for Kalmoth and 17 other senior commanders. The Concordat as a political entity was dissolved. Its 2,000 worlds granted independence to form their own governments. The galaxy watched and learned. Species that had been considering expansionist policies suddenly became very interested in diplomatic solutions. No one wanted to be the next concordat, to wake up something sleeping that should have been left alone. The human fleet didn't demobilize. That was perhaps the most important lesson learned. Humanity had tried being defenseless and trusting in the goodness of others. It had cost them millions of lives. They would never make that mistake again. The War Directorate established a new doctrine for human defense: peace through strength. Humanity would always offer peace first, would always prefer diplomacy to war, but they would maintain a military strong enough to ensure that anyone who chose war over peace would regret that choice. The dreadnoughts were kept in service, updated, and maintained. The Ghost Fleet remained active. The soldiers from the Unification Wars trained new generations in the hard lessons they had learned. Never again would humanity be helpless. On Earth, a massive memorial was built in Geneva, next to the building where the Terran Council had once debated. It was a simple thing, just a wall of black stone that stretched for a kilometer. On that wall were carved 8,327,000 names. Every person who had died at New Harmony and Harvest. Every evacuation casualty. Every civilian killed by concordat aggression. The inscription at the entrance read, "They died believing in peace. Their deaths ensured we would never be victims again." Admiral Kovac retired for the second time after the war. She attended the memorial dedication and stood before the wall of names, reading them silently. She stayed there for 6 hours, not moving, just reading. When someone asked her why, she said simply, "So I never forget what it cost." She placed a single photograph at the base of the memorial. It showed Supreme Hierarch Kalmoth being led away in restraints after his conviction. On the back she had written, "We kept our promise. Ambassador Chen Warwick didn't retire. He became the head of the new Human Diplomatic Corps, but his role had changed. He was no longer trying to convince the galaxy that humanity deserved a place among the stars. Everyone knew humanity's place now. Instead, he worked to ensure that no other species would suffer what humanity had suffered. He became known as an advocate for smaller, weaker species. When the Kryn Collective faced aggressive expansion from another large empire, it was Chen who organized the coalition to protect them. When a peaceful species called the Dalari were threatened with extinction, it was human ships that arrived to guarantee their safety. Humanity became the galaxy's reluctant peacekeepers, and the irony was not lost on Chen. They had wanted to be explorers and scientists, artists and philosophers. Instead, they had become guardians, the ones who showed up when bullies needed to be stopped. "Is this what we wanted?" he asked Kovac once, years after the war. "No," she said honestly, "but it's what we need to be. Someone has to stand between the strong and the weak. Someone has to remember that mercy is strength, not weakness, and that the powerful have a responsibility to protect, not exploit." "Heavy burden," Chen said. "Yes," Kovac agreed, "but we're good at carrying heavy burdens. It's what we do." 10 years after the war, humanity made first contact with a new species. The Valorians were aggressive and confident, arriving at human space with demands rather than greetings. Their ships were impressive, their weapons advanced, and they made it clear that they expected humanity to acknowledge Valorian superiority. Ambassador Chen Warwick, now older and tired but still sharp, met with the Valorian delegation. He listened to their demands with patient silence. When they finished, he smiled sadly. "Let me tell you a story," he said. "It's about a species called the Jathir Concordat. They were powerful, advanced, and absolutely certain of their superiority. They made demands of humanity, and we tried to comply. We evacuated our colonies. We abandoned our homes. We did everything they asked because we believed peace was worth any cost." The Valorian delegates listened with growing unease as Chen continued. He showed them footage from New Harmony, from Harvest. He showed them the trials, the surrender, the dissolution of the Concordat. He showed them what happened when someone pushed humanity too far. "The Concordat had 2,000 worlds," Chen said quietly. "They had armies numbering in the billions. They had weapons that could destroy planets. They had been conquering species for 50,000 years. And in 3 months, humanity dismantled everything they had built." He leaned forward. "Now you've come here with demands. You've made it clear you expect us to submit to your authority, so I need you to understand something very important. Humanity tried peace. We bled for it. We died for it. We gave up everything we had to preserve it, and we learned that some species see peace as weakness. The room was very quiet. "We're willing to try again," Chen said. "We always will be. We'll offer you friendship, trade, cultural exchange, everything we offered the Concordat. But if you choose the path they chose, if you see our preference for peace as inability to wage war, then you need to know what's waiting for you." He showed them one final image. The human fleet, 500 dreadnoughts in formation, ghost fleet surrounding them, weapons that could crack worlds held in reserve. "The choice is yours," Chen said, "peace or war. But know that if you choose war, if you force us to become what we were, we will be very, very good at it. Because we remember how, we just choose not to be. Don't take that choice away from us." The Valorian delegation left. They returned 3 days later with a completely different attitude. No demands, just requests for diplomatic discussions. They had consulted with other species, heard the stories, seen the evidence. They decided that peace was preferable. Chen accepted their apology and began negotiations for a proper alliance. 20 years after the war, the galaxy had settled into a new order. The Concordat's former worlds had formed smaller federations, democracies replacing the old imperial structure. Trade flowed freely across species borders. New alliances formed based on mutual benefit rather than subjugation. And at the center of it all, humanity stood guard. Not rulers, not conquerors, but protectors. The species that had learned the hard way that peace requires strength, that mercy must be backed by capability, that the only way to prevent war is to be prepared for it. The memorial on Earth grew over the years. New names were added as humans died protecting others, standing between the strong and the weak. It became a place of pilgrimage for species across the galaxy, a reminder of what happens when the powerful abuse their power, and what happens when the peaceful are forced to fight. Admiral Kovac died at age 97, still visiting the memorial every week until the end. Her funeral was attended by representatives from 200 species. Her coffin was carried by soldiers she had trained, past the wall of names she had spent her life honoring. Ambassador Warwick spoke at her funeral. "Sarah Kovac never wanted to be a warrior," he said. "She wanted peace as much as any of us. But when peace was impossible, she became what we needed her to be. She was the shield that protected us when protection was necessary. She was the sword that struck when striking was just. And she was the conscience that reminded us that war, even necessary war, comes at a terrible cost." He looked at the memorial, at the millions of names. "We tried peace," he said softly. "We gave it everything we had. And when peace failed, we showed the galaxy what humanity is really capable of. Sarah taught us that being capable of terrible things and choosing not to do them is what makes us civilized. That mercy is only meaningful when you have the power to be merciless. That peace is only valuable when you have the strength to wage war." He paused, old emotions rising. The Concordat called us weak. They called us primitive. They called us insignificant. They were wrong about all of it. We were never weak. We were restrained. We were never primitive. We were experienced. We were never insignificant. We were patient. And patience, as they learned, is not the same as passivity. Years later, a young Jathir student visited Earth as part of an educational exchange program. She stood before the memorial reading the names and began to cry. A human guide approached her, concerned. "I'm sorry," the student said. "My great-grandfather was a commander in the old Concordat. He gave the order to attack New Harmony. His name is on the war criminals list. I came here to, I don't know, to apologize, to understand." The guide, an elderly woman who had survived the New Harmony evacuation, looked at the young Jathir with compassion. "You're not responsible for what he did," she said gently, "but you are responsible for making sure it never happens again. That's why we built this memorial, not for revenge but for remembrance, so that everyone, human and alien alike, remembers what hatred and arrogance cost." The student nodded, tears still falling. "We learn about this in school now. Every Jathir child learns what the Concordat did. We're taught never to forget." "Good," the woman said, "because the moment we forget is the moment it can happen again." They stood together in silence, human and Jathir, before a wall of names that represented the price of peace and the cost of war. Across the galaxy, other species remembered too. The story of humanity's war with the Concordat became legend. Some species told it as a warning, never wake the humans. Others told it as inspiration. Even the weak can defeat the strong if they refuse to surrender. Still others told it as a tragedy. that peace failed and violence succeeded. But humanity told it differently. They told it as a lesson about choice, about how peace is always preferable but not always possible, about how the capacity for violence held in check by wisdom and mercy is what allows true peace to flourish, about how the real strength is not in the ability to destroy, but in the choice not to. And every year, on the anniversary of the Harvest Massacre, humanity observed a day of remembrance. Every ship in the human fleet powered down its weapons for 1 hour. Every military base stood in silence. Every soldier, from the newest recruit to the highest admiral, spent that hour in reflection. Reflecting on the cost of war, on the value of peace, on the responsibility that came with power, on the choice that humanity made every single day, to be guardians rather than conquerors, protectors rather than predators, builders rather than destroyers. The galaxy was safer because humanity chose that role, not because humans were naturally good or inherently peaceful, but because they had learned the hard way what war cost, and decided that peace was worth fighting for. The final transmission that had started it all became a historical document studied across the galaxy. Students analyzed Chen's words, debated their meaning, discussed the ethics of the war that followed. "We tried peace," the transmission said. "Now you will know human vengeance." But what the galaxy learned was different. They learned that humanity's true strength was not in their vengeance, but in their restraint. That they could deliver vengeance with devastating efficiency, but chose instead to deliver justice. That they could destroy, but chose instead to protect. That they could conquer, but chose instead to guard. 100 years after the war, an alien philosopher wrote a book about humanity that became required reading across the galaxy. Its final passage read, "Humanity stands as a reminder that the most dangerous beings in the universe are not the ones who cannot show mercy, but the ones who can show violence. They are dangerous not because they will destroy you for threatening them, but because they will protect others even at cost to themselves. They are dangerous not because they remember how to wage war, but because they remember why they stopped. They are dangerous not because they chose vengeance, but because they chose justice. And in choosing justice over vengeance, in choosing protection over conquest, in choosing peace backed by strength over either pure pacifism or aggressive expansion, humanity showed the galaxy what true civilization looks like. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, humanity's fleets patrolled, vigilant and ready, hoping never to be needed but always prepared if they were, because they had tried peace. And they had learned that peace, real peace, required the strength to enforce it, and they would never forget that lesson again.